A toxic person has been keeping you apart from your soulmate, and they just got exposed. Red heart sparkles. Don't skip. Listen carefully. The morning began like so many others. The first rays of sunlight slipped gently through the curtains, filling the room with warm shades of gold. A cool breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of fresh rain, blooming flowers, and newly cut grass. Birds greeted the sunrise with cheerful songs that echoed across the neighborhood. The little bakery at the end of the street unlocked its doors before dawn, filling the air with the comforting aroma of warm bread. Children laughed as they hurried toward school. Neighbors smiled while watering colorful gardens. Everything looked wonderfully ordinary. Nothing suggested that this peaceful day would quietly become the beginning of a life-changing realization. Because your heart needs this right now, because life's greatest lessons often arrive disguised as ordinary moments. For a long time, someone had believed that the growing distance in an important relationship happened naturally. They assumed time had changed things. They assumed feelings had faded. They assumed silence meant someone no longer cared. Those assumptions slowly became accepted as truth. Yet deep inside, something never felt completely right. There was always a quiet question lingering in their heart. What if I don't know the whole story? Because your heart needs this right now, because assumptions often create answers before truth has the chance to speak. That morning they prepared a simple breakfast. A warm cup of tea rested beside the kitchen window. Instead of immediately reaching for their phone or becoming distracted by another busy day, they simply watched life unfold outside. Across the street, an elderly neighbor patiently helped a child repair a broken bicycle. A young couple laughed together while planting flowers. A mail carrier stopped to help someone pick up papers scattered by the wind. Small moments. Ordinary kindness. Nothing dramatic. Yet those simple acts reminded them that healthy relationships are built through consistent care rather than extraordinary gestures. Because your heart needs this right now, because genuine love is often expressed through everyday faithfulness. After breakfast they walked toward a familiar bookshelf. Resting quietly upon it was an old notebook that had accompanied them through many different seasons of life. Its cover had become worn with time. Its pages carried dreams, prayers, disappointments, gratitude, and lessons gathered through years of living. Turning each page felt like meeting earlier versions of themselves. The hopeful version. The uncertain version. The impatient version. The version that believed every unanswered question had only one explanation. And the version now learning that life is usually far more complicated, and far more hopeful, than first impressions suggest. Because your heart needs this right now, because wisdom grows every time we remain willing to learn. Opening to a fresh page, they rested the pen gently against the paper. For several quiet moments they simply looked at the empty space. Finally they wrote. Today I choose to seek understanding before reaching conclusions. The sentence looked simple. Yet it carried enormous meaning. For many years they had unknowingly allowed fear to answer questions that only honest conversations could answer. Because your heart needs this right now, because truth deserves the opportunity to be heard before judgment is made. Later that morning they returned to the familiar park where they often reflected whenever life felt uncertain. The towering oak tree stretched confidently toward the bright blue sky. Gentle breezes danced through their branches. The peaceful lake reflected drifting clouds like polished glass. Children chased butterflies through colorful flower gardens. Families spread blankets beneath shady trees. Everything invited them to slow down. They found the same wooden bench overlooking the water. Instead of searching desperately for solutions, they simply observed the world around them. Because your heart needs this right now, because peaceful hearts often notice truths that hurried minds overlook. Nearby, a grandfather quietly helped his grandson build a small wooden bridge across a shallow stream for toy boats. Halfway through, one side collapsed. The boy sighed. "I ruined it." The grandfather smiled kindly. "No. You discovered where it wasn't strong enough." Together they carefully rebuilt the weak section. Watching them stirred something inside. Sometimes relationships don't end because people stop caring. Sometimes they simply reveal places where stronger communication is needed. Because your heart needs this right now, because difficulties often reveal opportunities for growth rather than reasons to give up. As the morning slowly became afternoon, they walked along the lakeside path. An elderly woman sat beneath a flowering tree reading quietly. After exchanging warm greetings, she gently closed her book and said, "I've learned something after many years." "What is it?" they asked. She smiled. Confusion grows wherever honest conversations disappear. Those words echoed inside. How many misunderstandings begin because people stop asking questions? How many friendships fade because assumptions quietly replace conversations? How many unnecessary hurts grow simply because no one pauses to listen? Because your heart needs this right now, because listening often prevents misunderstandings before they become lasting wounds. Later they wandered into the community flower garden. Rows of roses, daisies, lilies, and lavender stretched beneath the warm afternoon sunshine. An elderly gardener carefully removed tiny weeds growing between healthy flowers. Curious, they asked, "Why spend so much time removing such small weeds?" The gardener smiled warmly. Because weeds compete with healthy flowers. If they're ignored, they quietly take over. Those words settled deeply into their heart. Negative assumptions, resentment, rumors, unspoken fears. They often grow the same way. Not overnight, but slowly, quietly, patiently, until they begin overshadowing trust. Because your heart needs this right now, because healthy relationships require continual care and honest communication. The afternoon breeze carried soft piano music from a nearby community gathering. Only a handful of visitors paused to listen. Still, every melody was played beautifully. Watching the musician reminded them that beautiful things rarely demand attention. Integrity grows quietly. Compassion grows quietly. Trust grows quietly. Forgiveness grows quietly. Yet together they quietly transform lives. Because your heart needs this right now, because the strongest influences are often gentle rather than loud. Returning once more to the familiar wooden bench, they opened the notebook again. Today's page quickly filled with fresh reflections. Today I discovered something important. Not every voice deserves equal influence over my decisions. Some voices create fear. Others create wisdom. Some encourage assumptions. Others encourage honest conversations. Healthy relationships deserve truth, patience, and mutual respect, not rumors or unnecessary negativity. Reading those words brought unexpected peace. Not because every problem had disappeared, but because they finally recognized the direction they wanted to follow. Because your heart needs this right now, because clarity begins when we choose wisdom over fear. As afternoon slowly became evening, golden sunlight reflected across the calm lake. Families packed picnic blankets. Children waved goodbye to new friends. Birds returned to their nests. Everything gradually became still. Standing beside the water, they reflected on the title of this story. A toxic person has been keeping you apart from your soulmate, and they just got exposed. A gentle smile crossed their face. The story wasn't really about exposing another person. It was about exposing unhealthy patterns. Fear. Rumors. Assumptions. Poor communication. Those were the real barriers standing between people. The greatest discovery wasn't finding someone to blame. It was recognizing that honest conversations have the power to replace confusion with understanding. Because your heart needs this right now, because healthy relationships become stronger when people refuse to let negativity speak louder than truth. That evening they returned home beneath a sky filled with countless stars. The room felt peaceful. The notebook rested quietly on the table. Opening it one final time before bed, they carefully wrote, "Tomorrow I will choose understanding before assumption. Tomorrow I will communicate honestly. Tomorrow I will listen before believing rumors. Tomorrow I will protect meaningful relationships with patience, kindness, and truth. Tomorrow I will continue becoming someone whose heart reflects wisdom, compassion, humility, and hope." They paused before writing one final reflection. Today I learned that the greatest obstacles are not always other people. Sometimes they are fear, misunderstanding, and silence. When we choose honesty over assumptions, empathy over judgment, and conversation over rumors, we create space for trust to grow and relationships to heal. Those quiet choices become the beginning of every meaningful new chapter. They gently closed the notebook. Outside, the stars continued shining. Tomorrow remained unwritten. New conversations would begin. New opportunities to rebuild trust would appear. New lessons would quietly unfold. And for the first time in many seasons, they no longer feared the distance that had once seemed impossible to cross. Because they had discovered that healing rarely begins by finding someone to blame. It begins by choosing truth, compassion, wisdom, and courage. And listen to this. The next morning arrived with the same peaceful sunrise that had greeted countless mornings before. Golden light slowly spilled through the curtains, warming the quiet room. A gentle breeze drifted through the open window carrying the scent of fresh rain, blooming flowers, and freshly cut grass. Birds welcomed the dawn with cheerful songs. Outside, the neighborhood awakened little by little. The familiar bakery opened before sunrise, filling the streets with the comforting aroma of warm bread. Children laughed as they hurried toward school. Neighbors greeted one another with warm smiles. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Yet inside one heart, something had quietly begun to change. Yesterday's realization refused to fade. Instead of searching for someone to blame, they found themselves asking a different question. What if understanding is more powerful than suspicion? Because your heart needs this right now, because healing begins when curiosity replaces assumptions. They prepared breakfast slowly. Steam rose gently from a warm cup of tea resting beside the kitchen window. Instead of reaching immediately for distractions, they simply watched the morning unfold. Across the street, an elderly neighbor patiently taught a young child how to care for a small vegetable garden. Nearby, two friends laughed while repairing a broken fence together. A stranger paused to help someone whose grocery bag had torn open. Tiny moments. Simple kindness. No applause. No recognition. Only ordinary people quietly choosing to help one another. Watching those moments reminded them that trust is rarely built through dramatic speeches. It grows through consistent actions. Because your heart needs this right now, because dependable kindness becomes the strongest foundation of every healthy relationship. After breakfast they reached once again for the familiar notebook resting quietly upon the bookshelf. Its worn cover reflected years of faithful use. Inside were dreams, prayers, disappointments, victories, gratitude, and lessons gathered through every season of life. Turning those pages felt like walking through their own story. Some pages reflected fear. Others reflected hope. Some carried tears. Others overflowed with gratitude. Every chapter had shaped them. Every lesson had prepared them. Because your heart needs this right now, because growth often becomes visible only when we look back. Opening to a fresh page, they slowly wrote. Today I choose to seek truth with compassion. They paused. Then another sentence followed. Not every conflict needs a villain. Reading those simple words stirred something deep inside. For many years they had unknowingly believed every painful situation required someone to blame. Now they were beginning to understand something wiser. Sometimes misunderstandings grow because communication slowly disappears. Sometimes fear fills empty spaces where honest conversations should have happened. Because your heart needs this right now, because silence often creates stories that truth could have prevented. Later that morning they returned to the familiar park. The towering oak tree still stretched confidently toward the bright blue sky. Its branches swayed gently beneath the summer breeze. The peaceful lake reflected drifting white clouds like polished glass. Children laughed while feeding ducks. Families gathered beneath shady trees. Everything invited them to slow down. Finding the familiar wooden bench overlooking the water, they quietly sat. For several peaceful minutes. They simply listened. The breeze. The birds. The gentle ripples across the lake. The laughter of children playing nearby. Silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt welcoming. Because your heart needs this right now, because quiet moments often reveal wisdom that hurried lives overlook. Nearby, a grandfather patiently helped his grandson assemble a wooden puzzle. The boy became frustrated. "It doesn't fit." The grandfather smiled gently. "Turn the piece around." The boy tried again. This time it fit perfectly. The child laughed with excitement. The grandfather quietly said, "Sometimes the answer isn't changing the puzzle. It's changing the way we look at it." Those words echoed deeply. Perhaps relationships were often like that. Perhaps people sometimes spent years trying to force conclusions instead of changing their perspective. Because your heart needs this right now, because understanding often begins when we become willing to see differently. As the morning slowly became afternoon, they walked beside the peaceful lake. An elderly woman sat quietly beneath a flowering tree writing in a small journal. She smiled warmly as they approached. After exchanging greetings, she softly said, "I've learned something after many years." "What is it?" they asked. She closed her journal. People rarely regret listening with patience. They often regret judging too quickly. Those simple words remained long after the conversation ended. Because your heart needs this right now, because patience protects relationships from unnecessary hurt. Later they wandered through the community flower garden. Rows of roses, lilies, daisies, lavender, and sunflowers stretched beneath the afternoon sunshine. An elderly gardener carefully watered every flower before removing a few tiny weeds. Curious, they asked, "How do you know which plants need attention first?" The gardener smiled kindly. "I visit every day. If I ignored the garden for weeks, small problems would quietly become large ones." Those words settled gently into their heart. Relationships are gardens too. Trust requires attention. Communication requires consistency. Respect requires care. Kindness requires intention. When those things are neglected, misunderstandings often grow where understanding once flourished. Because your heart needs this right now, because healthy relationships require regular care, not occasional effort. The afternoon breeze carried soft violin music through the park. Only a handful of visitors stopped to listen. Still, every melody was played beautifully. Watching the musician reminded them that beautiful things rarely ask for attention. Integrity grows quietly. Patience grows quietly. Compassion grows quietly. Hope grows quietly. Yet together they quietly transform lives. Because your heart needs this right now, because quiet goodness often leaves the deepest impact. Returning once again to the familiar bench, they opened the notebook. Today's page filled naturally. Today I discovered something important. The greatest obstacle wasn't another person. It was allowing fear to speak louder than honest conversation. Rumors lose their power when people communicate directly. Misunderstandings fade when people choose to listen. Trust grows wherever kindness and honesty work together. Reading those words brought unexpected peace. The burden they had carried for so long no longer felt impossible. Not because every problem had disappeared, but because they now understood where healing truly begins. Because your heart needs this right now, because clarity grows when truth is welcomed with humility. As afternoon slowly became evening, golden sunlight reflected across the peaceful lake. Families packed picnic blankets. Children waved goodbye to new friends. Birds returned to their nests. Everything gradually became still. Standing beside the water, they reflected once more on the title of this story. A toxic person has been keeping you apart from your soulmate, and they just got exposed. A gentle smile crossed their face. The greatest discovery wasn't exposing another person. It was exposing unhealthy habits, assumptions, fear, silence, poor communication. Those had quietly created distance. The real turning point came when honesty finally replaced suspicion. Because your heart needs this right now, because healthy relationships become stronger when people protect trust instead of feeding doubt. That evening they returned home beneath a sky filled with countless stars. The room felt calm. The notebook rested quietly on the table. Opening it one final time before bed, they carefully wrote, "Tomorrow I will choose understanding before judgment. Tomorrow I will ask questions before believing assumptions. Tomorrow I will protect meaningful relationships through honesty and respect. Tomorrow I will speak with kindness, listen with patience, and forgive with wisdom. Tomorrow I will continue becoming someone whose heart reflects humility, compassion, courage, and hope." They paused before writing one final reflection. "Today I learned that lasting relationships are rarely separated by one dramatic event. More often, distance grows through unspoken fears, assumptions, and neglected conversations. Healing begins when people choose honesty over rumors, understanding over suspicion, and compassion over blame. Those simple choices quietly become the strongest bridge back to trust." They gently closed the notebook. Outside, countless stars filled the peaceful night sky. Tomorrow remained unwritten. New conversations would begin. New opportunities to rebuild trust would appear. New lessons would quietly unfold. And for the first time in many seasons, they no longer believed healing required finding someone to blame. Because they had discovered that the strongest relationships are restored through truth, patience, understanding, and the courage to communicate with open hearts. And listen to this. Several peaceful mornings had passed since everything began to change. The neighborhood looked exactly as it always had. The same sunrise painted the sky with soft shades of gold. The same birds welcomed the dawn with cheerful songs. The little bakery still opened before sunrise, filling the streets with the comforting aroma of warm bread. Children still laughed as they hurried toward school. Neighbors still waved while watering flowers or sweeping their front porches. Nothing around them appeared different. Yet inside one heart, everything had quietly begun to change. The confusion that once clouded every thought had slowly started to clear. The questions that once created fear had become invitations to seek wisdom instead. Because your heart needs this right now, because true clarity often arrives quietly after we choose honesty over assumptions. That morning they prepared breakfast with an unusual sense of calm. Steam slowly rose from a warm cup of tea resting beside the kitchen window. Sunlight stretched across the wooden table. Instead of filling every quiet moment with worry, they simply watched the world wake up. Across the street, an elderly man patiently repaired a small birdhouse. A young mother smiled as her child proudly carried a backpack almost bigger than they were. A neighbor helped another carry heavy groceries inside without being asked. Tiny moments. Ordinary kindness. Simple acts of generosity. Watching them reminded the person that goodness often speaks softly. Because your heart needs this right now, because kindness rarely announces itself, yet it leaves lasting footprints. After breakfast they reached once again for the familiar notebook. Its worn cover reflected years of prayers, dreams, disappointments, gratitude, and quiet victories. Every page reminded them of another season they had survived. There were pages filled with unanswered questions. Pages written through tears. Pages overflowing with hope. Pages celebrating simple blessings. Turning those pages no longer brought sadness. Instead, they revealed something beautiful. Every difficult chapter had quietly prepared them for greater wisdom. Because your heart needs this right now, because every season teaches something valuable when we remain willing to learn. Opening to a fresh page, they slowly wrote. Today I choose peace over unnecessary conflict. They paused before continuing. Not every opinion deserves control over my heart. Not every voice deserves equal influence over my decisions. Those words lingered on the page. Reading them felt surprisingly freeing. For years they had unknowingly given too much attention to negativity. Too much energy had been spent worrying about criticism. Too much time had been spent trying to satisfy people who could never be satisfied. Now they realized something important. Healthy boundaries are not unkind. They are acts of wisdom. Because your heart needs this right now, because protecting your peace allows love and kindness to grow. Later that morning they returned to the familiar park. The towering oak tree still stretched proudly toward the bright blue sky. Its branches danced gently beneath the summer breeze. The peaceful lake reflected drifting white clouds like polished glass. Families gathered beneath shady trees. Children laughed while tossing pieces of bread to ducks along the shore. Everything invited stillness. Finding the familiar wooden bench overlooking the water, they quietly sat. Instead of searching for someone to blame, they searched for lessons worth carrying forward. Because your heart needs this right now, because wisdom asks, what can I learn, before asking, who is at fault? Nearby, a grandfather and his granddaughter worked together on a colorful jigsaw puzzle. The little girl frowned. This piece doesn't belong. Her grandfather smiled. It belongs. It just belongs somewhere else. Together they searched patiently until the correct place appeared. The girl laughed with excitement. Watching them stirred another realization. Sometimes people spend years trying to force relationships into places where misunderstanding keeps growing. Healthy relationships are not forced. They are strengthened through patience, honesty, and mutual effort. Because your heart needs this right now, because lasting connections grow naturally through trust and respect. As the morning slowly became afternoon, they walked beside the peaceful lake. An elderly painter quietly captured the scenery on a large canvas. Curious, they admired the artwork. It looks beautiful, they said. The artist smiled. It wasn't beautiful at first. What changed? I stopped trying to paint every tiny mistake. I focused on the bigger picture. Those simple words settled gently into their heart. How often had they allowed one misunderstanding to define an entire relationship? How often had fear magnified small problems until they seemed impossible? The bigger picture often revealed much more hope than fear ever allowed them to see. Because your heart needs this right now, because perspective often transforms discouragement into understanding. Later they wandered into the community garden. Rows of roses, lilies, daisies, lavender, and sunflowers stretched beneath the warm afternoon sunlight. An elderly gardener carefully tied small wooden supports beside young trees. Curious, they asked, "Why do young trees need support?" The gardener smiled warmly. "So they grow straight while they're still becoming strong. And when they're stronger, they won't need the supports anymore." Those words quietly echoed inside. Healthy guidance strengthens people. Control weakens them. True love encourages growth rather than dependence. Because your heart needs this right now, because wisdom helps people become stronger rather than more fearful. The afternoon breeze carried soft violin music across the park. Only a few visitors paused to listen. Still, every melody filled the air with quiet beauty. Watching the musician reminded them that life's greatest treasures rarely demand attention. Integrity grows quietly. Patience grows quietly. Forgiveness grows quietly. Hope grows quietly. Yet together they quietly transform lives. Because your heart needs this right now, because gentle goodness often creates the deepest change. Returning once more to the familiar bench, they opened the notebook. Today's page quickly filled with fresh reflections. Today I learned that protecting peace is not selfish. Choosing healthy boundaries is not hatred. Walking away from unnecessary drama is not weakness. Listening carefully before believing rumors is wisdom. Speaking honestly with kindness creates trust. Respect grows where truth and compassion work together. Reading those words filled them with quiet gratitude. The burden they had carried for so long no longer felt as heavy. Not because every problem had disappeared, but because they had stopped carrying burdens that were never theirs to begin with. Because your heart needs this right now, because peace begins when we release what we cannot control. As afternoon slowly became evening, the golden sunset reflected across the calm lake. Families packed picnic blankets. Children waved goodbye to new friends. Birds returned to their nests. Everything gradually became still. Standing beside the water, they reflected once more on the title of this story. A toxic person has been keeping you apart from your soulmate, and they just got exposed. A gentle smile crossed their face. The greatest discovery wasn't exposing another individual. It was exposing unhealthy patterns. Fear that discouraged honest conversations. Rumors accepted without evidence. Misunderstandings left unresolved. Silence allowed to grow too long. Those were the real obstacles. The turning point came when truth, patience, and compassion replaced suspicion. Because your heart needs this right now, because healthy relationships become stronger when people protect trust instead of feeding doubt. That evening they returned home beneath a sky filled with countless stars. The room felt calm. The notebook rested quietly on the table. Opening it one final time before bed, they carefully wrote, "Tomorrow I will continue protecting my peace. Tomorrow I will communicate honestly. Tomorrow I will refuse to let fear make my decisions. Tomorrow I will listen with empathy before reaching conclusions. Tomorrow I will continue becoming someone whose heart reflects wisdom, humility, compassion, courage, and hope." Then they paused before writing one final reflection. "Today I discovered that real freedom doesn't come from proving someone wrong. It comes from choosing truth over assumptions, wisdom over fear, forgiveness over resentment, and healthy boundaries over unnecessary conflict. The strongest relationships are built by people who communicate openly, respect one another, and refuse to let negativity define their future." They gently closed the notebook. Outside, countless stars shimmered across the peaceful night sky. Tomorrow remained unwritten. New conversations would begin. New opportunities to strengthen trust would appear. New lessons would quietly unfold. And for the first time in many seasons, they no longer feared what tomorrow might bring. Because they had learned that lasting peace is not found by searching for someone to blame. It is found by choosing honesty, compassion, wisdom, healthy boundaries, and hope every single day. And listen to this. The final morning arrived with a quiet peace unlike any morning before. The first rays of sunlight slipped gently through the curtains, painting the room with warm shades of gold. A gentle breeze drifted through the open window carrying the scent of fresh rain, blooming flowers, and the promise of another beautiful day. Birds welcomed the sunrise with cheerful songs. Outside, the neighborhood slowly awakened. The familiar bakery unlocked its doors before dawn, filling the streets with the comforting aroma of fresh bread. Children laughed as they hurried toward school. Neighbors smiled while watering colorful gardens and greeting one another. Everything appeared wonderfully ordinary. Yet inside one heart, everything had changed. Not because every problem had disappeared. Not because every question had been answered. But because fear no longer controlled the future. Wisdom had quietly taken its place. Because your heart needs this right now, because lasting peace begins when truth becomes stronger than fear. That morning they prepared breakfast slowly. There was no rushing. No anxious thoughts. Only quiet gratitude. A warm cup of tea rested beside the kitchen window while sunlight stretched across the wooden table. Instead of worrying about yesterday or trying to predict tomorrow, they simply appreciated the present moment. A butterfly landed briefly on the windowsill before drifting toward the garden. Two robins gathered tiny branches to build a nest. A neighbor smiled warmly at a stranger walking past. Simple moments. Ordinary kindness. For years they believed happiness would arrive after life finally became perfect. Now they understood something completely different. Peace isn't found by controlling every circumstance. Peace grows when we choose honesty, wisdom, and compassion regardless of our circumstances. Because your heart needs this right now, because gratitude transforms ordinary days into extraordinary memories. After breakfast they reached once more for the familiar notebook resting quietly on the bookshelf. Its worn cover reflected years of faithful use. Inside were dreams once written with excitement. Questions recorded during lonely nights. Prayers whispered through difficult seasons. Moments of gratitude carefully preserved after quiet victories. Turning every page felt like meeting every version of themselves. The frightened version. The impatient version. The uncertain version. The hopeful version. And finally, the peaceful version. They smiled softly. The notebook had never predicted the future. Instead, it had quietly recorded the journey of one heart learning to replace fear with wisdom. Because your heart needs this right now, because the greatest transformation often happens inside us long before anyone else notices. Only one blank page remained. They rested the pen gently against the paper. For several quiet moments they simply listened to the birds singing outside. Then they slowly began writing. Today I finally understand what truly kept me from peace. It wasn't another person's opinion. It wasn't every misunderstanding. It wasn't every difficult season. It was allowing fear to become louder than truth. Today I choose something different. I choose wisdom. I choose honesty. I choose peace. Reading those words filled their eyes with quiet tears. Not tears of sadness, but tears of gratitude. Because your heart needs this right now, because gratitude often appears when we recognize how much we have grown. Later that morning they returned one final time to the familiar park. The old oak tree still stretched proudly toward the bright blue sky. Its branches danced gently in the breeze. The peaceful lake reflected drifting white clouds like polished glass. Families gathered beneath shady trees. Children laughed while feeding ducks near the shoreline. Everything invited quiet reflection. Finding the familiar wooden bench overlooking the water, they quietly sat. This time they weren't searching for answers. They simply enjoyed the stillness. Because your heart needs this right now, because contentment begins when we stop chasing certainty and begin appreciating today. Nearby, an elderly carpenter carefully restored an old wooden gate that had weathered many seasons. A curious child watched him work. "Why don't you just build a new one?" the child asked. The carpenter smiled warmly. Because strong things deserve the chance to be restored. They may carry scratches. They may show signs of time. But they still have value. Those simple words settled deeply into their heart. Relationships are often like that gate. Life leaves marks. Misunderstandings leave cracks. Disappointments create distance. Yet patience, honesty, compassion, healthy boundaries, and forgiveness can restore what once seemed impossible to repair. Because your heart needs this right now, because healing begins when people choose restoration instead of resentment. The afternoon quietly unfolded. Golden sunlight shimmered across the peaceful lake. A father patiently helped his daughter learn to ride her bicycle. Each time she lost balance, she stood up smiling. He never criticized her. Instead he gently said, "You learned something." She laughed and tried again. Watching them reminded the person that healthy relationships are places where people feel safe to grow. Not places where perfection is demanded. But places where mistakes become opportunities to learn together. Because your heart needs this right now, because encouragement strengthens hearts far more than criticism. Later they wandered through the community flower garden. Rows of roses, lilies, daisies, lavender, and sunflowers bloomed beneath the warm afternoon sunshine. An elderly gardener carefully watered every flower before removing a few dry leaves. Curious, they asked, "Do flowers all bloom together?" The gardener smiled kindly. "No. Every flower blooms in its own season. But every flower deserves patience." Those words quietly settled into their heart. People also grow differently. Some heal quickly. Others slowly. Some forgive easily. Others need reassurance. Healthy relationships honor those differences instead of demanding everyone grow at the same pace. Because your heart needs this right now, because understanding grows wherever patience is practiced. As the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, they returned once more to the familiar bench. Opening the notebook to its final page, they carefully wrote, "Today I release unnecessary fear. I release harmful assumptions. I release resentment. I release the need to control everything. Instead, I choose wisdom. I choose healthy boundaries. I choose honest communication. I choose compassion. I choose forgiveness. I choose hope." Reading those words brought a peace unlike anything they had experienced before. They realized the greatest burden had never been another person. It had been carrying fear long after wisdom had invited them to let it go. Because your heart needs this right now, because freedom begins when we release what no longer serves our growth. As evening painted the sky with brilliant shades of orange, pink, violet, and gold, families gathered their picnic blankets. Children waved goodbye to new friends. Birds returned to their nests. Everything gradually became still. Standing beside the peaceful lake, they reflected one final time on the title of this story. A toxic person has been keeping you apart from your soulmate, and they just got exposed. A gentle smile crossed their face. The greatest discovery had never been exposing another individual. The real discovery was recognizing unhealthy patterns before they controlled the future. Fear that replaced conversation. Rumors that replaced truth. Assumptions that replaced understanding. Silence that replaced honesty. Those were the real barriers. The turning point came when wisdom replaced fear. Because your heart needs this right now, because healthy relationships become stronger when trust is protected through honesty and respect. That evening they returned home beneath a sky filled with countless stars. The room felt peaceful. The notebook rested quietly on the table. Opening it one final time, they carefully wrote, "If this journey has taught me anything, it is this. Never let rumors speak louder than honest conversations. Never allow fear to replace understanding. Protect your peace with healthy boundaries. Choose kindness without becoming naive. Forgive when it brings healing, but also learn from difficult experiences. Build relationships on trust, respect, honesty, and compassion." They paused before writing one final reflection. "Tomorrow remains unwritten, but I no longer fear it." Whether life brings joyful celebrations, difficult conversations, unexpected opportunities, or quiet ordinary mornings, I choose to meet each day with wisdom, honesty, humility, patience, compassion, and hope. Those values may not remove every challenge, but they will guide every decision and help build relationships rooted in trust, respect, and genuine love. They gently closed the notebook. The journey had reached its final page. Outside, countless stars shimmered across the peaceful night sky. Tomorrow remained unwritten. New conversations would begin. New opportunities would appear. New lessons would quietly unfold. And for the first time in many years, they no longer searched for someone to blame. Because they had discovered the greatest truth of all. The strongest relationships are not protected by suspicion or fear. They are protected by honest communication, healthy boundaries, mutual respect, compassion, wisdom, and the courage to seek truth with an open heart. The room became still. The stars filled the night sky. With a peaceful smile, they turned off the light, ready to welcome tomorrow, not with fear, but with wisdom, hope, kindness, and love.